So it is being recorded. Just want to let everybody know that it is being recorded. And for anybody who might be interested, they can let me know after the fireside, and it can forward it to you after both Anthony and I had a chance to look at it. I want to be sure that he doesn't mind. Well, I would like to welcome everyone to our fireside gathering this evening, of course, especially our guest speaker, Anthony Vance, whose topic this evening is race unity. And we're so happy to have you here, Anthony. Thank you again for accepting the invitation. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, Fireside is an opportunity to introduce the teachings and principles of the Baha'i faith and take a look to see how we might apply them to our individual lives, the life of society, and to improve the conditions of society spiritually and materially, and also to help us in building a worldwide community that is based on equity, justice, fairness, peace, prosperity, and harmony. And that's a very, very big job. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Baha'i faith, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith is Baha'u'llah, and his name means the glory of God. The fundamental principle that he brought to humanity, very much related to our topic this evening, is the oneness of humanity. He said the greatest need today is for humanity to recognize its oneness, that we are one human family. He said, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other. He also said, importantly, that justice is the best beloved of all things in his sight, and that the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. It makes it very clear that without justice, there's no unity. Without justice and unity, there is no lasting peace in the world. And he did say that the peace and security of mankind is unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So it has a great deal of importance for race unity. So without racial justice, there can be no race unity. And without the racial justice and race unity, we cannot have that lasting peace, either here in this country or worldwide. And it has tremendous importance in this country. The Baha'i writings tell us the guardian of the Baha'i faith, who was administered the Baha'i faith, guided the Baha'i faith from 1921 to 1957, said that the most vital and challenging issue facing the American society is racism and the achievement of race unity. So we're very happy that, Anthony, you could be with us today to share with us and help us to gain a better understanding of how we can do our part as well as to have a better understanding. Before I introduce Anthony, we're going to have a short devotional program that has been prepared for us by Jaleh Sanahi, who unfortunately could not be with us this evening. We will start with a music video, and then it will be followed by the reading of a prayer. And I see John is here with his guitar too. That would be wonderful. And then my sister, Ann Perry, will be reading a selection from the Baha'i writings. So we'll start, and I always like prayers as we start with the music video. This is always a little bit tricky, but here we go.
Gather all people beneath the shadow of thy bounty, and call cause them to unite in harmony, so that they may become as the rays of one sun, as the waves of one ocean, and as the fruit of one tree. Gather all people.
YouTube ads beat Facebook ads every time. Let's face it, Facebook ad costs are going
Beneath the shadow of thy bounty, and cause them to unite in harmony, so that they may become as the rays of one sun, as the waves of one ocean, and as the fruit of one tree. Gather
Should I say a prayer?
Please.
Okay. O thou who art the Lord of lords, I testify that thou art the Lord of all creation and the educator of all beings, visible and invisible. I bear witness that thy power hath encompassed the entire universe, and that the hosts of the earth can never dismay thee, nor can the dominion of all peoples and nations deter thee from executing thy purpose. I confess that thou hast no desire except the regeneration of the whole world, and the establishment of the unity of its peoples, and the salvation of them that dwell therein. Baha'u'llah.
Ann Perry, are you here?
I am. O Son of Spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes.
Thank you so much to Sheila, and thank you, Anne, very much. And thank you, Judy, for admitting those that have been in the waiting room. I'd like to just take a moment to introduce Mr. Anthony Vance. He is currently serving as the director of the Office of Public Affairs for the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. Before assuming his current position in 2010, he spent 4 years as the Deputy Secretary General at the Bahá'í World Center in Haifa, Israel, representing it to the diplomatic community, to civil society, and parts of the host government. He is a lawyer by training and spent 21 years with the U.S. Agency for International Development in legal and managerial positions in Washington, D.C., Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, Botswana, and Egypt. He holds a BA degree in economics, an MBA, and a JD degree from Harvard University. Thank you so much, Anthony. We look forward to your presentation.
Okay. Well, first, thank you very much, Jan, for inviting me this evening. And you know, this is a very large topic, and it's also, in some ways, it's a very straightforward topic, and in some ways, it's a very complicated and sensitive topic. So, in advance, I ask you to accept my apologies if I have oversimplified some things or made overly complicated other things. And certainly I will have left out important things during the course of this, you know, relatively brief presentation. You know, what I thought I'd do this evening is start off, it occurred to me today as I was reflecting on some of the presentations I've made recently, is that I've never really talked about very much about faith communities and religion theologically in connection with race. And I now realize that that was a significant omission because historically, in some areas, it's very clear religion has been a factor that has moved civilizations forward. And we can talk about that later if you would like. But I think that anyone who looks at the developments in the Byzantine Empire after roughly 330 AD and in Islam, especially the years 900 to 1200, or if you were looking at India, you know, after the Buddha, maybe about 300 years after his appearance and the Buddhist civilization that developed there. I mean, it's obvious that religion has had a very positive influence on the development of civilization. Yet at the same time, you know, there are many who look at religion with respect to certain topics like the advancement of women, like race relations, and they see it as having been more of an obstacle than a factor that was moving things forward. It didn't necessarily have to be that way. From a Baha'i perspective, in fact, religion as an obstacle to these factors, these aspects of society, is actually a distortion of religion rather than what true religion is all about. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. The thing that I'd like to do then initially is just to get across the point that from a Baha'i perspective, as embedded in the Baha'i writings, it's totally clear, totally unequivocal that everybody is included as an equal participant in society, that everyone is valued, everyone has the same spiritual capacities. That is, spiritual capacities differ from individual to individual, but they don't differ on the basis of one's race or nationality or class or any other, any other group factor like that. And it's stated that way over and over again in the Baha'i writings. For instance, the video that you heard earlier had a number of quotes that are actually from the Baha'i writings about how we're all one, that, we're the fruits of one tree, the leaves of one branch, the flowers of one garden. Baha'u'llah's statements are numerous, in which he says things like the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. The Baha'i writings also deal specifically with race. And this is particularly important because race as a social construct didn't actually come into existence until maybe 300, 400 years ago. So it's not really addressed in Islam or Christianity or Judaism directly. Each relies on statements about Adam and Eve and all human beings derived from Adam and Eve, and therefore we're all one. But there have been a number of theological innovations that have been very negative, that have caused distortions, that have justified discrimination. The most famous in the United States that was propagated for centuries was the curse of Ham, and that Blacks represented the descendants of Ham, and that Ham's sin was passed on to his descendants and justified slavery and later justified discrimination. I mean, a total distortion of the meaning of sacred text. But nevertheless, because race as a social construct did not actually exist at the time when the Bible was revealed, either the Old Testament or the New Testament, there are no statements in the Old Testament or the New Testament about race. And as a result, there's nothing unequivocal to bar the discrimination that eventually took place in the American colonies and later under the laws of the United States of America. That omission it does not exist in the Baha'i writings. For instance, there are, just to be really crystal clear about it, there are three central figures in the Baha'i faith, and one of them, you know, in all of the writings of those three individuals are sacred, holy writings in our faith. One of them is Abdul Baha, who is the son of Baha'u'llah. And he says, close your eyes to racial differences and welcome all with the light of oneness. And again, quote, God maketh no distinction between the white and the black. If the hearts are pure, both are acceptable unto him. God is no respecter of persons on account of either color or race. All colors are acceptable unto him, be they white, black, or yellow. Inasmuch as all were created in the image of God, we must bring ourselves to realize that all embody divine possibilities. So clearly he's being very clear in saying, close your eyes to racial differences and welcome all with the light of oneness. And he's also being very clear in there being spiritual equivalence among people of different races. Now, of course, just to be, to elaborate a little bit further on that, when he does say, close your eyes to racial differences and welcome all with the light of oneness, it's clear that he doesn't mean, because of some other writings, which I'll read in a moment, it's clear that he doesn't mean don't notice diversity. What he means by this, in my opinion, is simply don't let race be a barrier between you and other people. Now, the reason why I come to that conclusion is because in another statement, and this is this is not the only place, but this is one of the clearest places. Abdul Baha compares the human race to the flowers of a garden. He says, quote, consider the flowers of a garden. Though differing in kind, color, form, and shape, yet inasmuch as they are refreshed by the waters of one spring, revived by the breath of one wind, invigorated by the rays of one sun, this diversity increaseth their charm and addeth unto their beauty. How unpleasing to the eye if all of the flowers and plants, the leaves and blossoms, the fruits, the branches, and the trees of that garden were all of the same shape and color. Diversity of hues, form, and shape enricheth and adorneth the garden and heighteneth the effect thereof. So diversity is not only something that exists, but it's something to be treasured, something that enhances the beauty of the human race. And in fact, rather than merely tolerating our differences, one can see from that quote that actually diversity is something that one should try to be attracted to. You know, it's funny, as you get older, you remember some things that your parents did that you never thought were particularly significant, but later on in life, you realize they are. In fact, in some ways, we're all kind of a little bit trapped by how we were raised. But one of the things that my mother, I remember enjoying quite a bit when I first recall this, maybe I was 7 or 8 years old. She really liked Japanese culture and really, you know, read things about it, and especially like their art and some of the dress and style. And, you know, here's this, you know, this Black woman raised in Brooklyn, New York. And at that point in her life, I don't think she had been outside of the United States. And yet she had become a Baha'i about maybe 12 or 13 years earlier. But she had this natural attraction to all sorts of interesting, diverse things. And I think that kind of thing, when you grow up with it, and realize that loving all sorts of cultures is not something that in any way detracts from a love of one's own culture, but actually enhances one experience, is a very valuable thing to learn. Another thing that helps Baha'is really to understand unequivocally this concept of the oneness of the human race, the idea that racial differences are something to be appreciated and attracted to, is the behavior of Abdu'l-Baha, who, as I said, was one of the three central figures in the Baha'i faith. He had lived all of his life in the Middle East and was actually formally a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire from the mid-1860s until the Young Turk Revolution in 1908 caused him and many other prisoners to be released. So in 1912, with this newfound freedom, he traveled. And one of the places he traveled to was the United States. And while he was in the United States, he helped to deepen the newly emerging Baha'i community, which at that time only had a couple of thousand people, and made a number of speeches and talks and had a number of private audiences with all sorts of people from all walks of life. One of those took place in New York City in 1912. And it took place after as a result of an incident while Abdu'l-Baha had a little bit of free time and was walking with his entourage down the streets of one of the streets of New York City. And when he was in the West, he wore his Oriental clothing. And so, of course, was immediately noticeable. And there were a bunch of kids who started to point at him and, began to behave in a way that was kind of inappropriate. And the Americans who were near there decided to do something about that. That is the American Baha'is. And they invited the kids to meet Abdu'l-Baha later. The kids accepted the opportunity to meet with him, and it was at the home of one of the Baha'is in New York City. And I thought and it was witnessed, this meeting was witnessed by a gentleman who at the time was a Unitarian minister. He later became a Baha'i, but at this point in time, he was still a Unitarian minister and was constantly going to Baha'i meetings and was really enthralled with his experiences with Abdu'l-Baha. So I thought I might read his account of what actually occurred, and because it's so helpful in understanding this whole concept of unity and diversity. So here's the segment of this book. The book is entitled, incidentally, Portals to Freedom. And for those of you who have the book, this passage begins on page 65. Abdu'l-Baha was standing at the door, and he greeted each boy as he came in, sometimes with a hand clasp, sometimes with an arm around his shoulder, but always with such smiles and laughter, it almost seemed that he was a boy with them. Certainly, there was no suggestion of stiffness on their part or awkwardness in their unaccustomed surroundings. Among the last to enter the room was a colored lad of about 13 years. This book was written in the 1930s, about 20 years after this event took place. That's why the terminology colored is used. He was quite dark, and being the only boy of his race among them, he evidently feared that he might not be welcome. When Abdu'l-Baha saw him, his face lighted up with a heavenly smile. He raised his hand with a gesture of princely welcome and exclaimed in a loud voice, so that none could fail to hear, that here was a black rose. The room fell into instant silence. The black face became illumined with a happiness and love hardly of this world. The other boys looked at him with new eyes. I venture to say that he had been called a black many things, but never before a black rose. This significant incident had given to the whole occasion a new complexion. The atmosphere of the room seemed now charged with subtle vibrations felt by every soul. The boys, while losing nothing of their ease and simplicity, were graver and more intent upon Abdu'l-Bahá. And I caught them glancing again and again at the colored boy with very thoughtful eyes. When his visitors had arrived, Abdu'l-Bahá had sent out for some candy. And now it appeared a great 5-pound box of expensive mixed chocolates. It was unwrapped, and Abdu'l-Bahá walked with it around the circle of boys, dipping his hand into the box and placing a large handful in the hands of each, with a word and smile for everyone. He then returned to the table at which he had been sitting, and laying down the box, which now had only a few pieces in it, he picked from it a long chocolate nougat. It was very black. He looked at it a moment and then around at the group of boys who were watching him intently and expectantly. Without a word, he walked across the room to where the colored boy was sitting, and still without speaking, but with a humorously piercing glance that swept the group, laid the chocolate against the black cheek. His face was radiant as he laid his arm around the shoulder of the boy, and that radiance seemed to fill the room. No words were necessary to convey the meaning, and there could be no doubt that all the boys got it. You see, he seemed to say, that he is not only a black flower, but also a black sweet. You eat black chocolates and find them good? Perhaps you would find this black brother of yours good also, if once you taste his sweetness. Again, that awed hush fell upon the room. Again, the boys all looked with real wonder at the colored boy, as if they had never seen him before, which indeed was true. So one of the things that's so important about that story is that Abdu'l-Bahá, rather than, trying to do something to, he could have had, for example, that could have been a story about putting a shade in front of each of the boys and then having them switch places and having them talk and try to figure out which was which just on the basis of their voice, and trying to therefore show that they're all the same and don't look at their skin color, I mean, he could have done some sort of experiment like that. But instead, Abdu'l-Bahá actually highlighted the color of the boy, saying first this is a black rose, and then comparing his face to this delicious black chocolate nougat. And of course, what he's doing there is highlighting the appreciation of diversity. That diversity is something that's beautiful, and that there's beauty to be found in people of all races, and in fact of people of all kinds of different kinds of backgrounds. So of course that's consistent with this whole statement in the Baha'i writings about consider the flowers of the garden and how the diversity increaseth the charm and addeth unto its beauty. Now, there's another piece to this that is also important, because many of you, already know this, but at the risk of saying something that you already know, 1912 was not an enlightened time in the United States as far as race relations were concerned. And this was the period of time when Abdu'l-Bahá was in the United States. There were all sorts of theories floating around about the differences between the races. In fact, not only were blacks considered to be inferior, but there were all sorts of theories about people from other parts of the world, whether you were from the Middle East or Southern Europe versus Northern Europe, or from Eastern Europe. I mean, it was just an extraordinary set of not even pseudoscience. It was just prejudice disguised as science that was floating around at the time, especially in the United States. It was, it was pervasive in our society. 9 years before Abdul-Bahá's visit to the United States, 9 or 10 years before his visit, President Theodore Roosevelt had Booker T. Washington over, the Black educator, head of Tuskegee Institute, Booker T. Washington over to the White House for lunch. And there had been Blacks in the White House before, but Theodore Roosevelt not only had him for lunch, but had his family there, his wife, his daughters, and so forth. And the reaction to that was one of outrage among large portions of the American population, such that Theodore Roosevelt was much more discreet in the future in terms of his relationship with, his social relationship with Black Americans. The whole idea that a Black man would be sitting at the dinner table with a white family was, for many Americans, especially in the South, but all over the country, was considered outrageous. And of course, in 1896, the Supreme Court of the United States had solidified a whole set of rules and legal rulings, that had made separate but equal, which of course it never was equal, but separate facilities, whether they're educational, transportation, or whatever, the law of the land in the United States. And then 3 years after Abdul-Bahá's visit, the movie, it was a tremendous hit, Birth of a Nation, was released. And that movie portrayed Black Americans, as especially Black males, as a threat to white America, especially to white women. The movie was theoretically about how the United States had developed, especially after the Civil War, but it was an enormous propaganda success and helped to revive the Ku Klux Klan. So this was the kind of America that Abdul-Bahá was arrived in the United States in 1912. And I say that because he was invited to, because there were also some positive trends. And one of the more positive things was that in 1909, the NAACP was founded, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And it was founded as a unified Black and white organization, by the way. Its founders, its initial founders and board members were Black and white and both Christian and Jewish. But it was small and it was just getting started. Its fourth convention occurred in 1912, and Abdul-Bahá was invited to speak twice at that convention. One of his speeches took place actually at Hull House in Chicago on April 30th of 1912. And the speech is probably about 10 or 15 minutes. No, it's a little less than that. But there's one part of it that I want to read, a very short part of it, because it seems to us today to be common sense, but it ran totally against the grain of what the thinking was in the United States at the time. In this talk, Abdu'l-Baha says, in physical bodies, quote, in physical bodies, in the law of growth, in sense endowment, intelligence, patriotism, language, citizenship, civilization, and religion, you are one and the same. In other words, he's talking about blacks and whites there. A single point of distinction exists, that of racial color. God is not pleased with, neither should any reasonable or intelligent man be willing to recognize inequality in the races because of this distinction, end quote. So this, for 1912 in the United States, that's a very strong statement. It's not consistent with the mainstream of American thinking. And, but it is the thinking that has guided the Baha'i faith and that is at the center, part of the center of its theology related to the question of the oneness of mankind. So for Baha'is, the oneness of mankind does not mean just merely, tolerating others and living peacefully with them. There are some parts of the world where peaceful coexistence is the name of the game. That's what some of the governments of the world are urging upon their populations, peaceful coexistence. Well, that's certainly an improvement from the status quo in some places, but that's definitely not anywhere near what the Baha'i faith calls for and what is actually embedded in the theology of the Baha'i faith. Again, the oneness of mankind is based on the concept of unity and diversity. And in fact, Baha'u'llah's statement is extremely strong. He says, quote, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. The well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So this is, this has implications well beyond just merely the United States. There are many parts of the world where there's discrimination of one type or another. We in the United States have a tremendous opportunity to, if we can get this right, set an example for the rest of the world. Because in the United States, it's very, we have virtually everybody here. I mean, I don't think there's a country in the world that is quite as diverse as the United States. And if this country were to move forward and truly adopt an attitude of unity and diversity accompanied by justice, it would be an example for the world. And in fact, as depressing at times as things might seem to be in the United States, we make progress, tremendous progress at times, and then we go backwards, and then we make progress again, and then we go backwards. The Baha'i writings assure, we as Baha'is believe that the Baha'i writings are divine in origin, and that where prophecies are made, they're actually going to be fulfilled. And there is one prophecy in the Baha'i writings that says that America will lead all nations spiritually. And that could only occur if the United States addresses the issues of race that have haunted its social and political life for almost 400 years. So there are some things that we all can do that are helpful with this. And I thought I would just sort of mention a few things. First, there are statistics that show that 7 out of 10 white Americans have no close Black friends. And by close is meant, according to the definition in this survey, By close was meant a person with whom they would have a meaningful conversation about their own personal life. And then 4 out of 10 Black Americans have no close white friends. And so when one lives in a society where there is so much lack of intimate intermixture, it leaves the society open to the acceptance of stereotypes. It makes it easy to look at the news and see, oh, that's a Black male who did that, and you know, and then 3 weeks later, the next time you see a Black male on TV, it's another one who's committed a crime, and you think to yourself, oh, well, this is what Black males are like, and you know, they're dangerous if you don't know any Black males, or if you have no close friends. Similarly, most Black Americans do have, you know, the fact that 4 out of 10 don't have close white friends means that 6 out of 10 do have at least one close white friend. So there's less ignorance, you know, on the part of Black Americans as to what white Americans are like. But still, you know, and there's more of an intimacy that has been created in many instances, at least on a percentage basis. But nevertheless, there's a portion of Black Americans, 4 out of 10, who have no close white friends, and some who live in fact, most Black Americans live in segregated communities, and they get to know white friends through their workplace, but not through their neighborhood. And so there's even among Black Americans, there's a possibility of the development of stereotypes and beliefs that individuals are automatically discriminatory because they live in a particular town or dress in a particular way that's associated with a particular portion of the white population. And so all of these things are destructive and potentially flammable under sets of conditions that create tension in society from time to time. And so, of course, one of the things we can all do is to try to make friendships across racial lines. And this kind of community building is extremely important as part of the solution to the problem of race. Because we can solve, even if we solve legislatively, certain systemic problems that have existed. You know, for example, residential housing is segregated, not just because of personal preferences. It's segregated because of certain patterns that were set into place as a matter of policy by the Federal Housing Administration in the 1930s. And then also that had been adopted earlier and continued to be adopted by real estate associations. Actually, if you look at some of the ethical mandates, the ethical mission or guidelines for real estate brokers, you'd be absolutely astonished that one of the things that was considered unethical for them to do until the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was to integrate a white neighborhood. In other words, to take a neighborhood that was stable and white and then theoretically destabilize it by having a Black center into that neighborhood. It's really an astonishing thing, and it was considered normal behavior. These are examples of systemic and institutional discrimination, either systemic through the Federal Housing Administration or institutional through real estate brokers. And you know, all of this ran up through even as recently as 2010 and 2011. Bank of America's, well, it was actually Countrywide became a subsidiary of Bank of America and had to pay $300 million in fines for discriminating on the basis of race in 2010 through some of their practices. And Wells Fargo the next year in 2011, or maybe it was 2012, Wells Fargo had to pay about almost as much. It was a little bit less in terms of fines for racially discriminatory practices. And there were other banks around the United States that had to do the same because of their practices. So this was something that continued, you know, even despite legislation that prohibited it, that continued through, you know, very recent times and may still be going on today, I suspect. So one can, you know, obviously the difference today is that these practices are illegal and these banks had to pay fines for them. But before 1968, none of these practices were illegal. Now, one could actually address these things: institutional discrimination, systemic discrimination. If the individuals of society do not have a change of heart and a change of attitude and a change of view, then if you can put them in institutions that have the right laws, and maybe their behavior will be modified, but one will never really get the kind of change that one wants. So all three things have to happen. Systems have to change, institutions have to change, and individuals have to change. And so we can all, of course, reach out across racial lines and try to get engaged by making friendships. Obviously, you know, you don't want to be artificial about this. I mean, you can't you can't walk up to somebody and say, I want to be your friend because I'm white and you're black, or I want to be your friend because I'm black and you're white. I mean, that's silly. But where opportunities arise and it feels natural, then of course, you know, rather than be passive, one can actually begin to make friendships. And certainly for Baha'is, we are very fortunate today in that we have a set of community building activities that we can include others in, that include devotional gatherings, where the word of God from the various religions of the world is shared, where we also have activities where we have study materials that are designed to not only impart knowledge, but to help the individual gain spiritual insights into different kinds of issues, and to provide certain kinds of skills that are helpful, whether they're as simple as better expressing oneself or being able to better understand historical processes. And all of this helps to create a sense of community. And we have things that we do also at the level of children, you know, at the level of youth who are 10 to 14 years old, and then adults from 15 onward with these, what we call study circles, with these materials that have been developed. And the wonderful thing about this is that going through these helps us to develop relationships. So it's a natural way to bridge distances between people. Yeah, you know, I have neighbors here who I have conversations with from time to time, you know, and they've become friends, but and some of them have actually come to one or two devotional gatherings at our home, and we get a little bit of an in-depth conversation about meaningful things in life. But on the other hand, I know somebody else who I just got to know through, who's of another race, and I just got to know through one of these study circles, and spent much less time with him, but much deeper exchange of ideas. And I feel closer to him with just a few hours of interaction than I do with some of these neighbors who I've been around for 9 years. So the quality of one's interaction really does matter. And I would, for those who might be interested, really recommend that some of these community building activities are really very, very useful in building relationships as well as in one's own personal development. And I thought I might end with one quote from this same individual. You know, people wonder how quickly can all of this change come about, you know, when one's talking about oneself. And this Unitarian minister whose book, Portals to Freedom, I was reading from a little earlier, one day asked Abdu'l-Bahá how it could ever be possible for him to attain a much greater level of spiritual development. In other words, he's having seen Abdu'l-Bahá and interacted with him, he realized that there was this goal towards which he should be aspiring. And the response that Abdu'l-Bahá provided to him was, as recorded by Howard Colby Ives, by the Unitarian minister, was, he said that it is to be accomplished little by little, little by little. And that certainly is consistent with a statement from Baha'u'llah in a book called The Hidden Words, in which he mentions that one should bring oneself to account each day. And so all of this change, you know, it can sometimes occur rapidly, but for most of us, it's little by little. We all carry with us all sorts of things that make it difficult for us to change. But if it's not really so much where one is, but where one is heading. And if one has decided to head in a certain direction, that's a good direction, and puts one step forward every day and perseveres, that's the key to it all. Certainly for American society as a whole, I mentioned earlier that we've made tremendous strides forward at times, and then we've moved backwards, and then we make strides forward at times and move backwards. The key, I think, in the future is going to be whether we can make some strides forward, especially with respect to the issue of race in the United States. And instead of backsliding, really persevere consciously, have a conscious effort as a society collectively to persevere and to continue in the right direction. So I thought I would stop there and hand things over to Jan for whether she would like to have comments or questions or whatever.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Anthony. That was a wonderful presentation. It was so nice to hear you sort of develop it from the early days of the Baha'i faith in this country with Abdu'l-Bahá's visit and bring it right up to the present day. I was so happy to hear you talk about the community building activities that are going on now that so many of the Baha'is are involved in worldwide. And clearly that is one of the ways I think the Baha'is have been able to make lasting and genuine friendships is through that community development work, working side by side with people of different colors, of different religions, because it's really open to everybody. Those community building activities are open to everyone. Wonderful way to really make connections with people that you might not have the opportunity to do so. So I think this is probably, thank you for the presentation. This really is an opportunity for anybody who would like to ask a question or make a comment. And I see a lot of clapping of hands. And yes, we're all very happy and really so grateful. So who would like to start with the first question, observation, comment? there is a hand under what's called reactions, where if you want to put up your hand, just hit that little logo and with a hand that might help, or just speak out, just unmute yourself and ask your question. We're not that large a group. We can keep it informal.
Hello, this is Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Hi. Anthony, that was a beautiful talk. Thank you very much. Very inspirational. And I might say, you know, you referenced the talk Abdu'l-Baha gave at the Hull House. I know Promulgation of Universal Peace has that whole series of wonderful, beautiful speeches that he gave. And so I see that end of the spectrum of this opportunity to share these fantastic words that he gave to the West that were so appropriate then and are so much needed now. And then we have the other end of the spectrum for teaching and outreach, where it was mentioned, these community activities, and it's kind of touching on these hearts that are reaching out, looking for opportunities that will come to us or connect with us. And we have that opportunity to share this new revelation. So it sure would be ideal, so to speak, if we were able to find some middle ground where we can actually take these beautiful words of Abdu'l-Baha and share those to a broader group, somehow through maybe the unity of the communities or interfaith groups, and be able to actually, whether it's excerpts from the speeches, and actually have the opportunity to share them with some congregations. Because I think it is just amazing how segregated some of these churches are, unfortunately. But at the same time, because of that segregation, it seems like, boy, you have an audience right there, a Black audience or a white audience, and yet we have so many answers in the words that Abdu'l-Baha had shared. Any thoughts about that?
Certainly, there are some local spiritual assemblies. Local spiritual assemblies are in the Baha'i faith, there's no clergy, and the religious affairs of the Baha'i community are governed by elected institutions, 9-member institutions called local spiritual assemblies. And there are some local spiritual assemblies that have in fact taken statements from Baha'i institutions, which include quotes from the Baha'i writings, and introduced them to local newspapers in various cities in the United States. Especially, there was a statement released by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States on June 19 of this year, related to the issue of race in the US. And that statement was promoted by a number of local spiritual assemblies in local newspapers across the United States. So certainly much more could be done, and I think that certainly there are many groups that are receptive to, especially interfaith groups that are receptive to anything that is supportive of unity in their communities today.
Anthony, there is a question in chat which says, what are your thoughts about working with youth to encourage them to reach out to others across racial lines and make new friends?
Boy, I think that's where there are maybe the greatest opportunities. I think youth are, they tend to be more idealistic. They're probably, on average, less prejudiced than their parents, although that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes youth just inherit or mimic whatever it is their parents do. But there's a certain flexibility in youth. There's a certain curiosity. I have a lot of optimism about youth in the United States today. In fact, if one includes people up to the age of 35, one will readily see that you may recall in the demonstrations after George Floyd was killed. I don't know if you were looking closely at the crowds in those demonstrations, like, for example, and most of those demonstrations were peaceful, by the way. But I saw a lot of them across the country in the news, the news broadcasts. And one of the things that I noticed was that in many of those demonstrations, a majority of the protesters were white. When one looks back at the 1960s, and I definitely was around at that time. I was quite young, but I remember the demonstrations that took place then. If for example, the marches that took place in the South were for the most part almost entirely made up of Black Americans. And there were a few occasions where many whites participated, but I don't think there was ever an occasion where a majority of the demonstrators were white. It's possible that the March on Washington in 1963 looks visually as though it was about half Black, half white. One would have to, there were a lot of people there. But many of these demonstrations recently after the killing of George Floyd, you could tell that a majority of the demonstrators were white. And that immediately tells you that there is a difference in the way that white Americans, young white Americans, by the way, the demonstrators were also, you could tell from their faces, they were primarily under 35, and so they were young and a majority of them were white. And to me, that is a sign of tremendous hope for the United States.
I have another question I'd like maybe if you could address, Anthony. You talked about the community building work, but I know your office has also been involved in public discourse. So I wonder if you could talk about the public discourse, maybe in social action, part of the work that the Baha'is are doing in the area, in this area of race relations.
Well, at the national level, our office partnered with Catholic University here in Washington, D.C. to initiate about 3 or 4 years ago a faith and race dialogue. And we invited faith-based organizations, and there are a number of them in the DC area, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, to join us, representatives of these NGOs, to join us in dialogues about some of the underlying assumptions that about faith and race in the United States. And so typically we'll put together a short paper of a page or a couple of pages that examines an issue like race and identity, race and materialism, other issues, that intersect with race, and have a discussion. And it's been very good in the sense that you have people representing organizations who are either fairly senior in their organization or in a few years will be senior in their organization. And they influence the thinking that occurs within that organization. And so, for example, I can tell that for some organizations, I can tell that some of the thinking that has come across has caused them to think more carefully and more in a more sophisticated way about identity, so that they really acknowledge that everybody has at least two identities. Most of us have multiple identities, but that there's a dominant identity, and that is being a human being. And for some people, in some organizations, that has not necessarily been the case, or they haven't really acknowledged the universal identity. They're not hostile to others. You know, they had always believed in peaceful coexistence and even developing alliances with other groups, but they never really conceived of themselves as having a dominant identity that is as a member of the human race. They might have, you know, I mean, if you ask them, are you a member of the human race? They'd obviously say yes, but that wasn't where they got their dominant identity from. And the idea that that could be one's dominant identity without giving up other identities, you know, like I am Black or also, or like I am Jewish also, or like I am this or that also, you know, is something that I'm not sure people had really thought about the implications of that, not only in their own lives, but what it actually means for society. You know, what does this actually imply later on when decisions are being made in organizations? So we do that, and we also have some other things that we do with this faith and race dialogue. We've developed a podcast that where we share some things that occur either in, we've had podcasts about Baha'i community building activities. We've had podcasts about historical societies in Maryland and at Georgetown University that deal with issues of slavery and its repercussions over time. So we're trying to build relationships that are hopefully constructive and that influence thinking in a positive way over time. That's at the national level.
Thank you, Anthony. Ronaldo has a question.
Thank you.
Comment.
Thank you, Anthony, for your presentation. Very illuminating, as usual. Everybody that presents here, we learn a lot. I have an observation question to see how you will like to address it. You mentioned that the word race did not come about into the popular vocabulary until about 400 years ago, was it?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think the first race statutes actually came into existence in the 1690s in Virginia.
Okay.
And so race, you know, people knew that people were of different colors, obviously, and they may have had their own personal thoughts about that, but race as a
category.
As a category that where you could actually say, oh, this person is going to be more intelligent because of his race, or more violent because of his race, or more this or that, you know, or less deserving, you know, that really didn't exist
until then.
Until then, yeah.
My question observation is the following. Since words that we create in a human language define how we understand reality, and this particular word, race, define how we see each other and how we categorize each other along the timeline that you just mentioned, I am wondering if we cannot help, even at our small individual level, if we consciously do what was done with the word Negro in American society. Once it was definitely identified that Negro word had all those connotations of oppression, slavery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they came up with the term African American. And nowadays you seldom hear somebody speaking on an everyday language and using the word Negro in that despictive way as it used to be, and it was a natural way of addressing the Black population. So I am wondering if we should not do the same kind of transition, consciously transition, and stop using the word race in our colloquial everyday language. Because we refer very easily to the Black race, the white race, the yellow race, the brown race, et cetera, whatever. There is no race, Black race, yellow race. There's a color people. So can we not come up with a word that can substitute race so that we can use it with the same positive reinforcement that African American is used today, so that we can change that concept of race? And I'm wondering if ethnic group would be sufficient, or if you have in mind spontaneously right now, one word that we can incorporate into our language, everyday language, so that we can contribute to this diminishing and recreating an image that the race doesn't exist. There is no Black race, yellow race, brown race. It's a human race.
Yeah. Well, certainly I understand the spirit in which you're making your comment, and definitely agree with the spirit of the comment. Whether as a practical matter, such a thing could be done without creating even more confusion than there already is today is another matter. But I definitely agree with the spirit of the comment.
On this, we all got together and came up with a term that we could actually do and accomplish what I'm thinking that we should be doing.
Anthony, there is an...
This is Bonnie.
Bonnie? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bonnie.
I was just going to comment on that, Ronaldo and Mr. Vance. So I'm a human resources professional, and you know, race is in our law. It's in the discrimination law. It's in our employee handbook. So at work, what I like to do is educate and say, yes, it is just it is anti-discrimination against race, and then I explain to my managers and educate them on the difference, and where I break it down to, like, these are the ethnicities, and so we don't want to discriminate anybody of any race because we're all one. So part of it is maybe kind of a grassroots where when we hear it or when we talk to each other, for me, I take it down to where I'm at work, because I can actually, there's 500 employees there. I'm figure, I can get them there. I can teach that way. But I try to kind of frame and re-educate. But it is in our laws, it's in our handbooks, it's there. So I think if we maybe grassroots, so I just wanted to kind of put that out there as a possible solution, and you know what I'm doing to try to.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. There was another question in chat. I don't see any hand up. So it says, thank you for your wonderful talks. I have a question regarding establishing the peace. In which stage of lesser are we? In which stage of stabilizing the lesser peace are we? And Mary, I saw your hand, so you're next.
Yes. Well, that's a really, really interesting question. And for those who are new, who are unfamiliar with the Baha'i faith or are new to it, the questioner is referring to a term in the Baha'i writings that's called the lesser peace. And it's related to a prophecy. That is, there is a prophecy in the Baha'i writings that peace will come about in several stages, but two very important basic stages are: one, the lesser peace, and two, the most great peace later on. The lesser peace will take place as a result of the world's political leaders putting in place institutions, mechanisms that essentially put an end to war. In other words, they have actually taken the kinds of steps that essentially will make it extremely difficult for war between nations to occur. That doesn't mean that all war will come to an end instantly. It doesn't mean that small skirmishes might not from time to time break out, but it does mean that the threat of annihilation, which has hung over most of the world since 1945, will have come to an end. There have been a number of encouraging things that have occurred since that prophecy was made that have tended to create greater unity among the nations. Some of them have failed, but at least they were good, at least as first steps, like the League of Nations. Though it was a failure, it was a tremendous first step. And then the United Nations system, which is still with us, is much stronger, although far from perfect. But at least the United Nations is able to do things like put peacekeeping forces in places and negotiate settlements in many places in the world. In fact, with smaller level conflicts, the UN system and even the League of Nations had some success with smaller scale conflicts. There are some steps that the Baha'i international community recently recommended just a few days ago in an open letter to further improve the UN system to make it stronger and more legitimate. And so we're still quite a ways from the actual establishment of the lesser peace. But there are, again, there are encouraging things that have occurred. The whole development of the European Union I don't think people fully appreciate how significant that is and how integrated Europe has become as a result of that, despite the British withdrawal from the European Union. The European Union, the European Parliament is elected directly by the peoples of the various states of Europe, and they pass legislation that applies all across Europe. It's an extraordinary development when you look at the way Europe was, right after World War II, with all of the hatred and resentment as a result of that war. So there are signs for encouragement, and certainly if the model of the European Union could be expanded to the world as a whole, step by step, we would be much, much closer to the lesser peace. And the letter of the Baha'i international community that was issued a few days ago actually recommended that the UN General Assembly have a body created parallel to it that is essentially elected in the same way that the European Parliament is elected. That is, with the delegates elected directly by the populations of the various countries of the world, rather than merely appointed by their governments, which may or may not be democratic in the way that they function. So I don't know how close we are to the lesser peace. I know that we've made a lot of progress, and that there's still quite a bit to be accomplished before we could say that the lesser peace is here.
Thank you, Anthony. That was a wonderful question. Thank you, Ornus. Mary, you had a question, I believe. You need to unmute yourself. You need to unmute. There you go.
Okay.
Good. Now we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm so grateful and I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And
Mary, there's a lot of interference.
I really wanted to make a
Mary, we can't.
I became a Baha'i in 1950.
Mary, we can't hear you. There's a lot of interference. Yeah.
Oh, why would that?
We're having trouble hearing you because there's so much interference.
Is it all right now?
Yeah, no. Can you put your question in chat?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Try, see if you can, we can understand your question.
I do need to make a comment. It's all right.
It's not coming through. I'm so sorry. Yeah, it's not coming through. There's just a lot of interference.
I wasn't going to ask a
We can't hear. No. And I'm going to have to ask you to mute yourself because it's also causing interference even when you're not talking.
No, I don't want to make a question. I want to make a comment.
Oh, okay. Can you do it in chat? Just write it out. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, my apologies. I'm so sorry.
What I wanted to say.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Judy has her hand.
Judy. You're muted.
Okay, no problem.
Judy, did you want to say something?
I did.
Good.
You know, we hear so much about institutional racism, and I am aware of so much going on to address institutional racism in our law enforcement and in our criminal justice system. I was wondering if from your vantage point, you see any other efforts going on in any other areas.
In other words, you're asking, in addition to policing and the criminal justice system, are there other sectors of society that, or areas of society where institutional racism is being addressed?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, probably the single most important challenge that we have with respect to institutional racism has to do with residential housing. In other words, residential housing is largely segregated in the United States. And I mean, I spoke about this a little bit earlier. It came about because of a variety of factors. Many of those practices and factors have been reversed and were reversed, at least from the standpoint of the laws of the United States in 1968 with the passage of the Fair Housing Act. But private practices continued and persisted, especially redlining by real estate brokers and redlining by banks. And I mentioned before that, you know, there were large banks that were fined for these practices back in 2010 and 2011. It'll be interesting to see whether, you know, the lessons have been learned from that, whether we begin to see efforts to truly integrate housing in the United States. One of the unfortunate patterns that has existed in the past is that when neighborhoods become, you know, neighborhoods are in good shape and housing values stay up when there are Blacks moving into a community, because, and I'm mentioning Blacks in particular because in the United States, anti-Black sentiment is by far the strongest, you know, racial sentiment. You know, there's racism directed towards other groups in our society, but against Black Americans, it's clearly the most, it's in most places, it's the strongest of all of the different prejudices. And so historically, neighborhoods have remained stable with Blacks moving into the neighborhood. And then there's a tipping point reached, which tends to be around 20% of a neighborhood being Black. And then then very rapidly after that, it flips over to white flight occurs, and it flips over to a very, becomes in a matter of just 3 or 4 years, sometimes 5 years, can become, 60, 70, 80% Black. Certainly, I saw that happen growing up in Hartford, Connecticut. I grew up in a place where probably 10% of my neighborhood, maybe a little bit less, was Black growing up. And then there was a tipping point that was reached where, and this was assisted by real estate brokers who would scare people into believing that their housing values were about to go down and they better get out of the neighborhood rapidly while their housing value still was there. And people would sell very quickly, and it was incredible. In the course of 5 years, this neighborhood, this whole section of Hartford, Connecticut, went from probably 80% white to 60, 70% Black in just 5 years. And then gradually even more and more minority, more and more Black and other minorities. So we'll see over the coming years, with the fines that were issued against these large banks, with the greater public consciousness of the fact that institutional racism persists, and that it especially persists in residential housing. We'll perhaps see over the coming years whether, and we won't be able to tell this overnight, but certainly 10, 15 years from now, we'll be able to tell whether institutional racism has been diminished as far as residential housing is concerned. Hopefully it will be, but it's going to really require, in my opinion, a few more things in terms of legislation, as well as a concerted public education, public relations effort on the part of the institutions of our society in order to convince Americans that they really do need to live together.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Judy, for the question. Others? Other questions, comments, reflections? I'm so happy to see Van has joined us. Welcome. Happy to have you here. We actually, at our last meeting, Van, we used your video, the most recent one, I think, in this day of Baha'u'llah. Oh my goodness, thank you for that. So, no more questions? This is your opportunity. I can't see everybody, so if I have, yeah.
I have sent a question to the chat to you, actually, Janet.
Oh, you did? Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that one, sorry. Okay. Let's see, let me go up a little bit. I can't see the whole question here.
Would you like me to read it?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and read it, because I'm having a little trouble finding it. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and the great questions. My question is about if we have any examples of the impact that the statements from BIC, I think it was called Turning Point to All Nations, was released at the 50th anniversary of the UN. And that's about 25 years ago. If you are aware of any impact in terms of the UN's changing policies or any other nations? Anybody knows anything on that?
Yeah, I myself am not aware of any impacts from that statement. I think there were others certainly who were tracking that who would be in a better position to respond to that question. It would be a good question to pose to the Baha'i international community in New York City.
Others? Okay, well, if not, I want to thank you again, Anthony, for a really outstanding, inspirational presentation. We hope we can continue this at another time. So happy to have you here. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
All the wonderful you're working to. Oh, somebody else had their hand up, Zivar?
Did Hattie Jane?
Hattie Jane, did you have your hand up? My apologies.
Maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought I saw that.
I am so sorry.
No.
Please, go ahead.
I don't even know if it's worth it. But one of doing some leading recently and so forth, someone made it a point that as soon as we try to label other people, for whatever reason, then we make them other, as opposed to being people just like us. So when we're thinking about African American, that makes it a label. Yes, that identifies to some extent the ethnicity, but again, it makes it another. So it becomes part of the layers that we have in our language. The other factor was, oh Lord, let's see, it went by the head, where'd it go? And that's already gone, forget it. And I don't even know if that was worth mentioning. And we're so used to labels, we're so used to understanding and knowing what it is, but it also creates a fence around expectations and expectations. So that's something that came up.
Yeah. Maybe if we could close with, I'll just say briefly that if we recall again the quotes from Abdul Baha and the story of the Black Rose and the whole incident with the children, the idea was it's clear from his statements that diversity exists, and that it's something to be appreciated and something to love and to be drawn towards. And of course, in order to even talk about diversity, we have to have some sort of language to do it. And so if we don't have language that differentiates people, then we can't talk about diversity and we can't even talk about appreciating it. Now, part of the problem with our society is that we have a history of so much oppression that it becomes painful under certain circumstances for some people to use some of the terminology that has existed historically. But if, on the other hand, if our approach is one of actually loving diversity and appreciating it, it becomes obvious that we need language to identify it. And again, it's a whole mindset. It's not one of it's like those flowers in the garden. If I've got the roses next to the I'm not a florist, so I'm getting into the wrong area here. But you got your white roses, your black roses, your red roses, and if you can't identify them by their colors, then you're not going to really be able to describe and truly appreciate that garden.
Anthony, we have a comment, I think, from Philip. And Philip, it's good to see you. Welcome back. You're going to have to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent talk and excellent comments and questions. And so about what Anthony just said, I have noticed that in non-American cultures that there's a tendency to be more matter of fact about differences of color and race, and people talk about it freely. And I'll give an example that that is easily available for anyone to read. And perhaps you've heard of Thor Heyerdahl, the famous navigator who navigated into the Pacific Ocean from Peru in a raft. And in the course of his book, the Kon-Tiki Expedition, he talks about a lot of people of a lot of different colors and even sizes, but he's very matter of fact about it. He's only describing them. And I found the book to be very free of prejudice. Now he's Norwegian, and and again, the book is the Kon-Tiki Expedition. I'll put it into chat in a moment here. And I liked his approach. The only place where a little bit of prejudice showed through was where he suggested that civilization arrived in the Americas from pre-Columbian European navigators. And so that was the only thing where a little bit of a feeling of superiority showed through. So let me put the title of that book, and I'd like to recommend it as reading. Plus, it's a very humorous and delightful story, and there are movies about it and everything. But I liked his approach, where he talked about people who were brown, who were black, and had many different customs, and he was very respectful of them. And that's what I appreciated about the book.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, others? Oh, Van. Yes, yes, yes.
I was thinking about how difficult it is when I don't know whether it's in America only, but when we talk about race, we like for everybody to be one humankind. But we can say cars and trucks, we can say roses and lilacs, and we don't mind those distinctions. But when we start talking about racial difference, it becomes difficult, because a way to not talk about it is to make us one. And I think that is the goal, that we become one, but we'll never be just alike. You know, the garden is beautiful because of all the different colors, all the different kind of flowers. And so recognition, but also acceptance of the need to make sure that we do the things that make us feel like we are one, is, I think, our challenge, particularly when you think about Shoghi Effendi says it's the most vital and challenging issue, and that it's not going to be easy for us to even recognize all the things we've learned. You know, all of us, no matter what kind of background we've had, we've learned a lot from the lineage that we have. If it was good, wonderful. If it had little bad pieces, no. But how would we recognize them? So trying to recognize them, I think, is the most difficult thing. And that's what I think we're called upon to do when we start talking about race, and we talk about white and the varying shades of brown, which are all over the country, all over the world. So it's a challenge, I think, for us, a challenge to zero in on this one piece that obviously in America right now has become out in the forefront. And every once in a while, it'll be out front when something major happens, and we say, why did that happen? haven't we learned to love one another? Haven't we learned that no matter what we look like, we are all one. We are one human species. That's difficult because our instinct is to be with our own. And trying to get over that is, it's difficult, even I think in my old age. There's so many things I remember from my childhood, and my childhood was all Black. And they're vivid memories, very vivid memories. And I never had a time that I thought that we would be able to sit here like this and speak with each other, because it was not something that could be done in my childhood. It was not something I could be done in my young adult life. So this is a hard subject.
Thank you, Van. Thank you for those observations. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I was hunting for the number.
God bless. Oh, other questions, other comments, other thoughts, reflections?
If I may.
Yes, and nice to see you as well.
Thank you. You know, that language is a powerful thing. Words are very powerful, both positive and sometimes, you know, hurtful. You know, very early on, Anthony, you mentioned Abdul Baha's interaction with a young Black boy, and his tone and the words that he used the word Black. He also used the word rose. So it's a qualifier that shows our love for each other, that may be really at the heart of things, rather than just merely describing or descriptive. It's our interrelationships, it's our reactions. You know, Van, you said childhood memories. I think we all have some beautiful childhood memories. My most vivid one is watching Neil Armstrong land on the moon. You know, I'm sitting there in this little TV in Iran and saying, what a world we live in. What a beautiful world we live in. And you know, color, you know, status didn't mean anything to me as a child. It was just this wow, you know, factor. And I'm sure every child in us can see that. And I would hope that we can have every opportunity to voice that, to show that, to interact with each other in that spirit of love. But being descriptive of each other in a positive manner is maybe a start, rather than just descriptive in a factual manner. It's this interrelationship that really would help. I had a question for also Anthony. You mentioned the systemic racism in the housing, basically housing. And I wondered, because I've personally tried to move into some neighborhoods that are predominantly African-American, and actually it's been a mix. It's been Spanish, it's been African, it's been African-American, and it's so hard to overcome that bridge of trust. And you know, especially when so much historic hurt has been there, right? Especially in the African-American community, that's the strongest hurdle to get across, that, you know, it's this conception of trust. Any insights you can share, you know, for us white non-Black folks that are trying to reach out as much as we can, how we may elevate that trust?
Thank you, Bez. Thanks for the question.
Well, that's a really important question. You know, there is a statement in the authoritative Baha'i writings where about basically, you know, that synopsizes what whites can do and what Blacks can do to address the question of race relations in the United States, especially, and also within the Baha'i community. And there's a without quoting it, it's the portion that I think is most relevant. It has to do with just simply being patient. That is from the standpoint of a person who's not a Black American, to be patient with the lack of responsiveness on the part of people who have received, quote, such grievous and slow healing wounds, end quote. And so, you know, earlier today, we were talking about, you know, spiritual progress and how it's made little by little, according to Abdu'l-Bahá and his suggestion to Howard Colby Ives here. And also we were talking about how the United States has made progress and then it backslides and then it makes progress and then it backslides again. And that one of the things that we really need to do, assuming that we make progress again in the not too distant future, is to avoid backsliding. And again, it gets back to this whole question of perseverance and, you know, you know, just really not giving up. And I think certainly most of us, regardless of who we are or our background, are impressed when people persevere with us, you know, when they don't give up on us. And, you know, you're still here 10 years later and, you know, still treating me decently and trying to become friends. And, well, maybe I will be your friend, you know, since you've shown such, you know, sincerity and consistency. But others may have some, you know, other comments on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Others? Yeah, I liked what you said about perseverance, and it reminds me of the story of Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land when he was a prisoner, and there was a gentleman there that would always cross the street when Abdu'l-Bahá, just to avoid passing him by or touching. Having to interface with him in any way. And Abdu'l-Bahá for many, many years took care of him, helped him, provided him with medical care when he needed it, and did all of these things. And finally, after about 26 years, the gentleman came to Abdu'l-Bahá and he said, after all these years, these 26 years, and I treated you so poorly and you've been so kind to me. He sort of surrendered himself to Abdu'l-Bahá at that time. But it's the persistence. I mean, Abdu'l-Bahá stayed with him, loved him, took care of him all those years. And with all of the persistence that Abdu'l-Bahá had to embrace this gentleman, let him know that he loved him. And of course, Abdu'l-Bahá was a prisoner, and you know, there's a lot more to the story, but that just kind of reminded me of how that we do need to be those of us who are haven't suffered through the oppression that our Black brothers and sisters have. That we have to reach out. We have to be persistent. We can't give up. We have an obligation, a responsibility, and a privilege, really. So that's all I wanted to. Thank you, Anthony, for that. Others, Addie Jane. Saw you this time.
I'm sorry, but one thing, a statement that a friend made recently who was Black, who said that they were so tired of educating those who were white. And after that, I made a little more attention to history and personal experience in my immediate realm of Virginia and the States. And it's the history that people have lived with, known with, are still experiencing in many ways is so vitally important to, if you don't acknowledge it face to face, acknowledge it if the opportunity comes up. Because like someone in a meeting said, "Oh, there's not any there's not any prejudice anymore. That's over with now." And the lady and I looked at each other and went, and said, "Oh, yes, there is." And this is about 2 years back, 3 years back. So it's like in ignorance, we want things to be calm and stable, but we don't understand. We didn't live the lives that other people have lived. And particularly here in the States, we need to understand better and read more of what they have told us about their lives. Like in 1964, most of us here will recognize that year. I don't think maybe one or two that's younger. But that was when the Supreme Court said that it was illegal for the state of Virginia to incarcerate the gentleman who was cohabiting with the lady of a different color, even if they were married, and could throw them in jail, and did for a year. And it wasn't until 1964 that law was challenged and shot down. And that's not all that long ago in my world.
Thank you, Hattie Jane. Yeah. It's not that long ago in my world either.
Well, since I'm only 35, no, just kidding.
Yes, be kind.
Yes, I have a daughter who's 30. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to joke about something. It's irrelevant.
Bonnie, go ahead.
Well, I know when I started my human resources education and career, one of my most favorite classes and professors was labor law. And he explained to us the circumstances behind some of the laws. And I think education is definitely very vital in this, and educating ourselves. One of the things I like to educate my managers on, and
oh dear, we're losing you, Bonnie.
At will, which Black railroad worker from getting his retirement. If you really look down or really go in and read about it. And that really fired me up. And this is before I found out about the Baha'i faith or started educating myself. But, I always want to make sure that when managers are trying to terminate someone, they're not just thinking well, it's at will. Well, no, we need to be just. And I find myself quoting a lot of the writings now, and even in the workplace, no one's really recognizing, they like it. They want to know more about it. And so I think definitely educating ourselves and not being afraid to spread that in any facet. I chose to be an HR representative because I wanted to serve God, and I felt that would be the best way. And then I found out about the Baha'i faith, and I thought, oh, these go so well together. But I think educating ourselves is definitely a really big part of this, so that we know how to change our hearts, not just to change it, but how we do it. And educating in everything, science, law, just knowing about that. So I wanted to add that as I'm trying to myself educate those special.
Thank you, Bonnie. That's very helpful. Yeah. Others? Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, a wonderful evening. I thank all of you for coming. Any of you who would like to be on the list for notification, if you're not at the moment, just put your email address in chat, and I'll make sure that you are on the list. And again, thank you, Anthony, for really a wonderful presentation, guiding us through this conversation this evening. So grateful. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Vance, and please say hi to Mrs. Vance and Shada and your son and the rest of the family. This is from Waikiki, Yoko.
I will be sure to do that.
Oh, that's lovely. You know, that's a wonderful thing about Zoom and people being able to come from so many different places to be able to connect people. And I think it was Ronaldo and Patricia here, they're in Belize, and they've been wonderful, steadfast here every fireside. And I don't think I could go on if you guys weren't here. But it's really a wonderful up. And my sister in Maine, my goodness, I don't get to see her very much. I see her on Zoom more than I see her in person. Well, I guess that's true of all of us right now. But really, I'm so grateful for everybody who came this evening. Van, thank you again for coming. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, so.
Thank
and
you.
Yep. So if people would like to stay and visit, it's okay. You know, when we have firesides in our home, we always have time for tea and refreshments and socializing. So if anybody wants to stay, hi, Chris. So happy you're here, Chris Wade.
Well, I've been here the whole time, of course.
I know, but we don't see you.
You know, Abraham Lincoln said you can Zoom some of the meetings some of the time, or all of the time, and all of the Zooms some of the time, but you can't Zoom all the meetings all the time. You know, it was either him or Ben Franklin, I don't remember.
You still have your sense of humor. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. Even though we don't see much of each other anymore. But I always loved your sense of humor. Oh, I try. Often fail.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Vance. Thank you, Janice.
Oh, thank you. My gosh, it was so nice to see you as well. Yes, is that Shaheen with you?
Yes, indeed.
Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy you joined us tonight. And Philip, thank you. Michigan, you're in Michigan, right?
We're in Arlington, Virginia.
Yep, you're in Arlington. Philip Turner, you're in Michigan, right?
No, I'm in Illinois.
Illinois. Wow, I was in the right part of the country.
Right, actually on the west side of Illinois by the Mississippi River.
Ah, well, I was glad to.
Thank you for asking.
Kind of return this evening as well.
Great, great meeting, great questions and conversation. I really enjoyed it. Even though I arrived late because I got mixed up with the time zone.
Oh, you did. Oh, well, we'll probably I better start putting the different time zones in. Okay, and Faye, where are you from?
I'm from Texas.
Oh, you're in Texas. Oh, wonderful.
Texas, yes. My sister Fahime gave me
your
number. Yes, and thank you, Mr. I enjoyed your speech. Thank you.
Boy, I'm glad somebody called you out there. I didn't realize who you were until you started to respond there. Yeah, my God, it's been
a long time.
Yes, Faye was at the World Center when we arrived there, and her sister Fahime used to live overlapped with us in Kenya for a few years.
Oh, wonderful. Well, got a lot of the Kenyans together tonight.
But I'm a Texan right now.
Yes, I can tell from your accent there, Faye.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Please give my regards to Ladan.
I will do that. I will do that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Van, if you're going to be on for another moment or so, I'm going to change my virtual background to a picture you might like to see.
Oh, Dizzy Gillespie?
No.
Oh.
I was hoping I had a picture of Van and his family when they came to Scottsville and sang
Oh, nice.
But I didn't find it right on my saved pictures right close at hand. But I've got another one that Van would like to see, I think. It's from 1971. Give me a second.
I wasn't even born then.
71.
Carry on, people.
Well, Van, I have to tell you, I really considered using the video of you, the choir at the World Congress, which has kind of been floating around Facebook. And I was just listening to that recently. I think I posted it on my Facebook page. But I was thinking of using that tonight as well.
They are
one of my favorites. Yeah. Do you do firesides, Van? Are you available to do a fireside?
Sure.
You shouldn't have come on tonight. You should know me better than that.
I couldn't believe it took me so long to get here. I was looking at another Zoom, but I thought I could quickly skip over. And
well, I remember.
I
remember you used to do firesides when we were doing them in our home.
Yes.
Years ago. Yeah. A long time ago.
That's right. Yeah.
And do you recognize the young man in the middle of that picture?
Oh,
Lord, that's Walter, isn't it?
It is indeed. And on the left in the gold shirt is Rick Steers. On the right in the maroon vest is Bob Gundry, father of Bob, Rick, and Walter in the late 60s had a singing group in Southern California, basically.
Oh.
Wednesday's Children. Because they chose that name because the Bob and Baha'u'llah apparently were both born on Wednesdays. And the old rhyme says, Wednesday's child is full of woe. So this is, Bob's eating an apple right there. This is after our wedding at the Leroy Iowis Grove at the old Geyserville Baha'i School. So, and I recorded the concert they did at Sonoma State College 2 days earlier.
How did you pull that photo up so quickly?
I used it as a backdrop, as a virtual background for a devotional gathering Thursday night in the cluster, because Jeff Levezzo, who the Charlottesville cluster devotional gathering on Thursdays, used a Baha'i Blog studio session song, Prayer by Walter, whose hair isn't all black anymore.
No kidding.
Yeah, so you can find Walter on Baha'i Blog studio sessions. Yeah, Walter looks more like Van now, doesn't he, Van?
Walter what?
I say Walter looks a little more like you now than he does in this 1971 picture.
Oh, well, not quite.
You gotta be careful, Chris. You're crossing a line here.
Oh, well, isn't that what we're all about tonight, is crossing lines?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. But age is a line you really better be careful about crossing. Some of us are a little sensitive.
You mean I shouldn't try crossing back across a certain line?
Yeah, I don't know what I meant other than you can tell who has a sensitivity.
I just sent that picture to Walter.
Oh, really?
Oh, I didn't say anything about it. I just said on Zoom tonight.
He'll recognize it because I used the cover picture on the CD, and I sent copies to him and Bob and Rick and a few other people who were there. So this
was actually right after a wedding?
Yes.
Boy, you can tell it's the 60s because today, I mean, nobody would go to a wedding that casually dressed, you know.
Well, they were traveling, of course. They had come up from Southern California and they played a concert at Sonoma State College.
Mm-hmm.
And on Friday night, the 18th day of the fast, as a matter of fact, was March 19th. They flew up and performed before they got to eat. And then Judy and I invited them to sing at our wedding at Geyserville 2 days later on Nowruz, which they graciously did.
Cool. Very nice.
Should I go look for my picture of Van and his family and stuff?
No, I would love to see that one.
No, but I
spare us.
I'd like to see your wedding photo if you've got that one handy.
Oh yeah, let's see. Let me switch screens here and see what I can draw. Carry on, people. Carry on.
The 60s. I wasn't even around then. I don't know. I'm quite.
Some of us were.
No, I don't want to have this conversation.
I think Hattie Jane and I are probably close, as a matter of fact.
I wouldn't want to deny any year of existence. There's been so much going on.
Right. Yeah. Well, I will just say that my mother was pregnant with me when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Wow.
Really?
Really?
I wouldn't have believed that, Chris. I wouldn't have believed that.
Yeah. So you see, I was literally crossing that backwards. Let's see. I've got so many pictures.
I don't know how anybody can access pictures. Mine are all in boxes, and I have never been very good about putting them in albums, but they're really wonderful to have and look back on. Yeah.
Oh, I started getting out boxes of prints also, and that was amazing.
Yeah. So how's everything in Chicago and Wilmette, Van? A lot going on?
No. Well, yeah, it is. You know, we're
I know you got a lot going on.
Every day at 12:30 from here. Prayers.
You have prayers every day.
They continue to do that.
And that's a wonderful thing too.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's wonderful. Well,
and we're busy. I can't imagine not being at the temple or at the Baha'i offices, and yet we're very busy.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know how other people feel, but I feel like I've been more busy since we started Zooming in.
Yes.
than we were. But you don't spend all that time going to meetings. And you only have to dress from the waist up. It's great.
And now it's just not nonstop. It's not just Monday through Friday.
Yeah, it's every day of the week. There's so much going on. Yeah.
Don't give away all your secrets there, Jan.
No, I'm not.
I have to dress from
Trust
the
me, I'm not.
I am not finding the.
Well, you'll be back. We'll all be back together. Just have it with you next time when you come.
Let's see what I can do.
You were somewhere toward the mountains in Virginia?
Scottsville is 20 miles south of Charlottesville. It's about 25 miles, 30 miles maybe to the Blue Ridge Mountains.
I do have a couple of pictures of us. We came there to sing, seems like.
Yes.
And there's a sign. There's a sign.
Yeah, right.
I have that picture.
I think I sent you that picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had done a bunch of teaching. I think one person showed up. We felt so bad.
I have
never heard of that happening. Only one person.
They did. Well, there's a very famous one person who showed up. Proclamation in Africa. It turned out to be a hand of the cause.
Oh my, yeah, that's right. That's right. Remember that story. Well, thank you again, Anthony. I mean, you all can stay on. I don't like to cut anybody short, but maybe people do need to move on. But I'm serious, Van. I'm going to be in touch with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'll sign off now here.
In touch with you too.
Thank you, Mr. Vance.
Anthony.
We'll see you, Van.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
It was wonderful.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night all.
Good night, Chris.